Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
And I'm Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
All right, here we go, Josh.
All right, so today we're going to talk about Judas and the Black Messiah. It's a movie directed and co-written by Shaka King, starring Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, along with a few other people. You got Martin Sheen in there with a bunch of makeup on. You got Jesse Plemons in there looking all creepy. And it's about the Black Panther Party in Chicago in the late 60s, but it's not specifically about the leader of the Black Panther Party at that time, Fred Hampton, and his death. It's also about this other person who was involved in his life in that short period of time in the late 60s who was an FBI informant. That's played by Lakeith Stanfield, and Daniel Kaluuya plays Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. So I thought that the concept of this movie was really interesting, kind of bringing in this other element. Because, I mean, I've heard the name Fred Hampton before, and we saw Fred Hampton earlier in 2020 portrayed by Kelvin Harrison Jr. in The Trial of Chicago 7. He was one of the guys with the black berets on sitting behind Bobby Seale. So yeah, I mean, we kind of like have brushed past him in seeing other movies just even within the last year, but I didn't really know anything about Fred Hampton, and I just watched the movie last night, and I didn't want to really like dig in too much until I saw the movie, because I wanted to really focus on the movie as a movie and then figure out the history afterwards. How do you deal with, for lack of a better word, biopics? Like, do you look at a movie like that and you're like, this is the truth? Because that kind of all got busted up by JFK with me, which is a really great movie. I love that movie, but it's not the truth, maybe, all the way.
Well, it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in the past. I think it's a movie, and it's a scripted reimagination of the truth, or an imaginary vision of the truth. I don't want to make it sound like it's made up completely. JFK is a perfect example. Biopic is a perfect description. That was going to be one of the first things that I brought up, because it does remind me of, we've talked about the rock and roll biopics before, the Buddy Holly story, What's Love Got to Do with It, Ray, which is an exception to the rule in my opinion. But all of those movies are good, walk the line, but you can tell you're not going to be able to condense a person's life into 2 hours. And actually, this movie's 2 hours and 6 minutes. Seems shorter than that now that I think about it. But so you have to take everything with a grain of salt. And with this movie and these kind of biopics, all it does is start me down a rabbit hole of Googling and history watching from this point on. All I've done is Google as much information about these two guys, about this story, about the Black Panthers, about a documentary, Eyes on the Prize, I believe it's called. And then there's an Eyes on the Prize 2, which I'm interested in watching now. So it's a good jumping off point into learning about true history through fictionalization. This picture is framed in the last, I think, 2 years of this guy's life. It's not this guy's whole life. So we don't really know anything about him, which is sort of a down point for me for the movie. I would like to have known more about the guys regardless of their situation. But this movie is obviously 2 years or so before his death, his murder. And so we are learning what we need to know in those 2 years, fictionally speaking. And a lot of times people are like, well, it doesn't have this and it doesn't have that, and it's not anything about his mother, it's not anything about his upbringing and all that other stuff, which I agree. There needs to be more of that in this film. But that said, there's a movie where Helen Mirren won the Oscar for Best Actress called The Queen. And it literally is the year that Diana was killed, Diana, Princess of Wales, her daughter-in-law. And it's how the Queen dealt with that situation and the Prime Minister at the time. So we're not learning about the history of the Crown. You can watch the TV show The Crown to watch all of that. Some of that's completely fictionalized too. We're learning about that year after Diana died and what the ramifications of the way the Queen reacted. So it's situational. It's just a portion of these people's lives. That's what this film is. I always want to say Jesus and the Black Messiah. I don't know why.
Well, Jesus, Messiah, you know.
Yeah, it's just a portion of these people's lives. I don't know if it's the responsibility of the moviegoer, but for me, once I'm activated, I have to know everything. I have to read, I have to find documentaries, I have to find out what I was taught, if anything, when it comes to these figures, nothing. And then I need to figure it out from there. So I start with truth versus fiction. And there's a plenty of blogs on the internet about what's fictionalized in this film and what's the truth. So it's a movie with a narrative about an FBI informant, not about the Black Panthers per se.
Mhm.
It's a movie about what happened to this guy who, was a car thief and a criminal, and Jesse Plemons' FBI character comes to him and says, you can do this or you can go to jail for 10 years. And so he decides to do this. So that's where I go from this point on. I accept the reality of the world for what it is. Then I figure it all out afterwards.
Yeah, and I think that the cool part about this movie is that instead of just being like a Fred Hampton biopic where we see him growing up as a kid and then we see the aftermath of his death afterwards, and this is literally just it's like two men living their lives very young. Actually, they were both 19, 20 years old when this was going on.
17. Bill O'Neill was 17.
Yeah, and then Hampton was 19, 20 when he joined the Black Panther Party. But so it's like this meeting together of their lives for a short period of time, and that's what we see. We see them kind of coming together and their relationship, but then also it kind of breaks apart. And there's most of the time in the film, we either see Fred Hampton or we see Bill separate. I mean, every once in a while there's scenes with them together, but I think that the concept of the film is really interesting, and it's a great hook into the story, and it makes it more intriguing than just focusing on one man's life for a long period of time. It gets butts in the seats, I think. So I think that's really cool. But then at the same time, I think that structure, the way they have it set up, may have suffered a little bit because I felt like there was enough interest in each of the characters that I wanted to see a little bit more of both. And I wanted to see more of specific relationships. Roy, the FBI agent, and Bill, I wanted to see kind of their interactions a little bit more sometimes. I wanted to see Bill's relationship, how it developed with the Black Panthers. I mean, they do somewhat of a decent job, at least in the film. You can see his development within the Black Panthers, and you can see his mind kind of weaving back and forth between, I don't really care about this or I'm really into it. And then seeing Fred Hampton and his relationship, how it builds with were they married? I don't know if they were married before he was murdered. So yeah, either way, there's a lot of chess pieces and they're all kind of like bumping into each other. And I felt like there wasn't enough time with certain things. And so that's my main kind of like, I wish there was a little bit more of this and that and that. And Fred Hampton as a character in this film is kind of like fully baked. Like he's convicted and he knows what he wants to do. He knows what he needs to do and he knows what his responsibility is. So in some ways that's kind of a difficult character because where's the arc for that character? He had a love story type of an arc, but where's the arc for that character? The other characters, Bill and the FBI agent, their relationships with the structures that they were within and their emotional ties to their allegiances changed, I think, or morphed throughout the film. And those were the ones that I was really interested in and are minds that you can dig deep into.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you 100%. Fred Hampton's fiance, Deborah Johnson, not married.
Got it.
She was 8.5 months pregnant when he was killed.
Insane.
And speaking of his fiance, Dominique Fishback is the actress who plays her.
Yeah.
She is a revelation. She has whatever it is. All of them, I'll start with this, all of them have the gravitas as actors to bring things to the screen that might not have been on the page. Things that we don't get to see, you can see in Lakeith Stanfield's eyes. And Daniel Kaluuya, he is slotted for an Oscar nomination, and I see why. He brings that charismatic quality that Fred Hampton had to the screen, and he does it without any of those cliche Oscar moments. He doesn't scream, yell, cry, emote in all of these big monologues, just by a look. And we learned that about Daniel Kaluuya in Widows. A look, albeit a look in that movie that could kill. We learned that actor can just stare and look at us, and we know 100 pages of dialogue without ever hearing a word. So the actors, Jesse Plemons, once again, Martin Sheen is covered up, but he does his job. So the actors are electric. There is this power behind their performances. But I agree with you 100%. I still think there was time in this narrative to show us some other stuff about these characters. Other than Fred Hampton's love affair, with his fiance, and it's a beautiful love affair, and they're really good together. You can just see they loved each other, and she's phenomenal. I'm gonna be obsessed with her for the longest time. There's secret talks of her becoming a surprise Oscar nominee, and man, that would be, yeah, it would be so great. It was so great because there is always that person who just with no disrespect to anybody, kind of sneaks in, and everybody goes, where did they come from? If it's anybody, I hope it's her. And the other thing about that with Oscar nominations, her performance proves to me that there are other people who are being predicted to be nominated. And I'm okay with it because I love those people, but they're not doing what she did in this movie. They're deserving in their own way, these other nominees, these other possible nominees, but whatever this actress does, it's I think only she could have done it in this movie the way that she did it. And that's something intangible. But I would have liked to know, where's she from? What's her backstory? I mean, you kind of get a little bit of it.
She's a college student. She likes poetry.
Yeah. And because she's so electric, I don't really care on some level because I got enough from her. And that look at the end, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I would just 2 minutes of that. I could live in it if I did that on screen. I could live in it. But I do want to know how they got through their daily life, how they went about financing all of this stuff, how they went about doing all this stuff. That said, the stuff that we do learn is important because what happens is history, and in particular, history about somebody who has been a scare to the general public is skewed, and it's not taught and it's not told. And then it's also, what do they call it? Revisionist history, where they revise it to make it more pleasant than it, or less pleasant than it was. So you end up being scared of characters that you know nothing about because of other reasons. And for me to hear about the things that this organization, the Black Panthers, were doing other than scaring people was interesting. You know, he uses it a couple times where he's fed 3,000 kids and all that other stuff, and those school programs and the after school programs and stuff that actually didn't really exist back then. He kind of created all of that stuff, and this organization created all of this stuff. So I would have liked more of that stuff seasoned in. I mean, we don't really know anything about Bill O'Neill other than from the beginning of the movie until the end of the movie. But at the end of the movie, which I don't think is a spoiler, and I don't think there's a whole lot of spoilers. I mean, you pretty much know what's going to happen to Fred Hampton. Yeah. He is the Messiah character, so figure it out, people. But also history, all you have to do is Google, and you know. So I don't think I'm giving anything away. But when you see the real Bill O'Neill at the end of the film, the depth and the texture and the substance in that man's voice from all that he's been through is devastating. And I know this is after the fact, and he's much older, and he's lived quite a few years after this. And so he's had time to reflect, and he's had time to be interviewed, and probably hell on wheels his life has been. And he ends up killing himself after the second documentary comes out. So he obviously had a troublesome life afterwards. I would have liked to have seen what led him to where he was at the start of the film. Just season it in a little bit here and there. A conversation with him and his mother on the phone. That's always works for me. When he calls, everybody's got to call home to their mother when something traumatic is happening to them in a movie. But it also allows you to see the person in a different light. You get to see how the person's mother is, how the person's reactions to his mother. It tells us stuff. That scene between when the guy who gets killed in the hospital.
Was that the actor from Moonlight?
Yes, it was. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah. Yes, it is. But who was that mother talking to? Is it
talking to Daniel Kaluuya?
You learn in that conversation about that character told us more about that character than we learn about almost all the other characters combined in this film. All by her saying one thing. When I see him, even to this day, I see him at 7 years old. And that tells the audience all they need to know about their relationship. Everything they need to know about that character. Everything they need to know about a mother's love for her kid. And it's a beautiful moment. It's a beautiful line, and it affected me. I'm wondering why they didn't season that in. You know, like, where is that with the other characters? I don't know. Maybe they didn't think it was important. Maybe the operations of what the Black Panthers did, what the government did, what his speeches said before, during, and after certain events, maybe that was more important to Shaka King than anything else. I don't know.
I listened to an interview with the Lucas brothers, who are a comedy writing duo. They're stand-up comedians. They're twins. And they initially they had the idea for a Fred Hampton biopic, and a long, long time ago, years ago. And they were developing it. And then once they found this relationship between Bill O'Neill and Fred Hampton, that's when they started developing the script and bringing in other people to help write, and got Shaka King involved. And also, we haven't talked about Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler is kind of like one of the load bearers of this project. I mean, he's one of the big people who got this to screen. So he definitely deserves credit too. But they were talking about how really, Bill O'Neill is kind of like a unredeemable character. I mean, he's just like the worst guy because he was doing something so egregious, getting into the trust of all of these people, even becoming the head of security for the Chicago Black Panthers, and becoming a personal bodyguard to Fred Hampton, all the while betraying him and all the while giving information to their enemies. So for those guys, at least in this interview that they were on Larry Wilmore's podcast, and they were talking about that, and you could just tell, or I could tell listening, that they were a lot less interested in Bill O'Neill than they were in Fred Hampton. But having the Bill O'Neill character provided that kind of juicy story beat.
Well, that's fascinating to me because I believe it's Bill O'Neill's story, and that Fred Hampton is the supporting character in his story. And that you couldn't tell the story without the two characters, but there's this debate out there whether or not Daniel Kaluuya should be a supporting actor in the supporting actor category or best actor category. And in my opinion, that shouldn't be based on screen time. It just shouldn't. But to me, he's there to support the storyline that the writers have set us up for, and that's Bill O'Neill's storyline. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that they sound like they're way more interested in Fred Hampton, because the movie comes across as almost a redemption song for Bill O'Neill. Almost let's try to understand why somebody would do what he chose to do. Because he obviously at some point, I say obviously, but at some point it seems, and Jesse Plemons says this to him, that he's kind of buying into the rhetoric of the Black Panthers, which would make sense because they seem like a pretty good organization. They seem like they want to do good things. They seem like they want to right some wrongs and do good things in their communities that aren't being done for them or already supplied so they can access those things. They're setting those things up in their community. Fred Hampton talks somewhere in midpoint of the film about starting the clinic. And the most important thing is not me, but this clinic, the movement, not me, not the person, mm-hmm. the power of the people, not me. Mm-hmm. Don't be worried about me. Let's get this. Did you do what you were supposed to do? He says to that guy. And the guy's like, and he's like, okay, then you need to stop focusing on me and go get that clinic set up, because we don't have this in our community. So it seems to be that, for what I took from it was there redemption for Bill O'Neill? Was there a redemption because of the situation he was put into? Of course, nobody likes a rat. Stitches get, or what is it?
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah, right. Okay. So to me, it sounded like they were trying to understand why he would do what he would do, and did the movement and being around Fred Hampton and all of these people who were trying to do some good in this world, did it affect him? And it's interesting because I have seen this storyline before. We've seen the rat before, and he has a change of mind, and he gives up, and he comes back, and he gives up, and he's threatened by the cop. We've seen this storyline a million times in films. Maybe that's why they chose it, because it works. But I'm just wondering, what would it have been like to really see how, their idea of what they thought Bill O'Neill's character was changing from being around Fred Hampton. They give us a little bit of it, but they don't really.
I think there's I'm sure he's having some sort of cognitive dissonance where he's like, I'm with these people all the time. I would think that would be a threat for any undercover, whether you're an undercover FBI agent or whether you're an informant or whatever, where, you've got a job to do. And essentially that his job is to extract as much information as possible from the Black Panther organization. And that is his job. But at the same time, he's integrating into their society. He's becoming an inextricable part of their society. So, but ultimately he makes that decision to still ally himself with the FBI and ally himself with people who mean to harm Fred Hampton. Now, it didn't necessarily start that way. And that's kind of the stuff that I'm interested in. It's like when he initially agreed to not have to go to jail for the 5 years for impersonating an agent, 2 years for stealing a car, all that stuff, then, he probably wasn't understanding what he was in for. And then at the same time, Jesse Plemons' character, the Roy character, he probably wasn't understanding the lengths to which he was going to have to go, or he was going to have to ask Bill to go to. And you can see both of those characters kind of reevaluating throughout the film. And especially, I mean, the scenes when Roy is either being pushed by his boss or even by J. Edgar Hoover at one point, he has these interactions where he's being pressed, and he thought that they were the White Knight. He thought that they were the group that was trying to right wrongs and trying to protect Americans. And what he's starting to see is that they're actually targeting specific Americans because those Americans don't agree with J. Edgar Hoover or agree with an overarching view of what you should do. And so it's an abuse of power and all of that. But he ends up having to, they evoke his children and all that stuff, and he has to make a decision in the same way that Lakeith Stanfield's character, that Bill has to make the decision. It's like, you need to either be on board or you're against us. You're for us or against us. And so he makes that decision, and he's in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm interested in at what point he flips, and we get to see the phone call where he's like, oh, Roy told me that they poured boiling water over this person and then he's dead and he's in the bottom of the lake and all that. And it's like, well, no, I mean, the person was killed in cold blood by our informant. So things are topsy-turvy, and Roy is having to recalibrate in real time. But he just has to push forward, I guess, because that's what he's getting paid for or something. I don't know. That's interesting to me.
Absolutely. Well, if you're talking about what people are told in a scenario that can convince them to do something, yes, Bill O'Neill is threatened by, or I don't know if it's necessarily a threat, but it's a promise. If he doesn't do this, if he doesn't become an informant, then he has 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, 2 years for car theft, blah, 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 blah. It's when Jesse Plemons tells him that they're the Black KKK, when the human brain turns into something other than self-preservation, that Bill O'Neill is now going on the lines of, this organization is as dangerous as the KKK. So I find everything you said very interesting. What I find even more interesting is, when does Roy Mitchell, when does he switch back? Because by the end of the film, he's fully in it. And I think it's the scene when Fred Hampton gets out of jail and does that speech, and it's a very volatile speech, and he says some very difficult things to justify when you're talking about a peaceful movement. That said, it's in anger, it's in frustration, not to justify any kind of violence towards anybody, and I don't believe in violence, but I've been thinking a lot about this, because when I was growing up, the Black Panthers were painted as this organization that were just down with us whiteys, and we are going to kill everybody who doesn't fit into who we think is right in this world. And that's a false narrative, obviously, because these things that I've learned since I've been reading for the last 3 or 4 days. That's not what the organization was about. I'm not trying to say that anybody's justified in violence, but I am going to say this. When Matthew Shepard, do you know who he is? Do you remember who Matthew Shepard is? He's the young kid who was... Okay. When I heard about him, and I thought about a young person in their early 20s pretty much being beaten to death, tied to a fence, and then left there to bleed out all night long, all because he was gay, it angered me so much that I can understand somebody wanting to pick up arms and hurt their oppressor. And I do remember saying to myself, if anybody comes at me like that, I will go down. I will fight to the death, because that to me is it's just unfathomable and unacceptable that somebody beat somebody and tied them to a fence and let them bleed, all because of their sexual preference. So imagine walking around in this world with a different color on your skin that people don't like, and years and years and years and years of oppression and systemic racism and years of being abused verbally, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, financially, over and over and over and over again. I can imagine somebody like Fred Hampton getting to a place where enough is enough and he just says what's in his heart. I'm not condoning any violence to anybody, but I'm telling you, when Matthew Shepard happened, and I thought to myself, if something like that happened to a friend of mine because they were gay, I would probably, I don't know how I would control myself. I would like to believe, now that I'm middle-aged, that I'm mature enough to understand that that's just an emotional reaction to it. But I'm not 100% guaranteeing you I could. Nowhere is there a justification for violence towards anybody for any reason unless you're defending your life or somebody else's life in a situation.
There's definitely a difference between self-defense and instigation, and there's instigation of physical altercations, and then there's also responsibility for your own actions too. I mean, that can't go unsaid, I don't think. But I think it comes down to, is it okay to punch a Nazi? And it's like, well, if the Nazi's punching you, you should definitely punch them back. But if they're just like walking across the street, then maybe
you did it again. I spent 10 minutes telling a story and you just sum it up in one sentence. I love it. That's exactly what I'm saying.
So yeah, but
can you imagine walking through your life, your whole entire life, having to look over your shoulder the whole entire time because you're worried somebody is going to hurt you physically because of who you are? It's devastating. It's mind-boggling. I could see how your brain would turn off and your whole rationale might change. And the anger that would be brought up in you, not justifiably to hurt anybody, but the anger I could see mutating how you would act.
And we get that scene. We do get a scene of that with the character Jimmy. We alluded to him earlier, played by Ashton Sanders, who saw multiple cops go into just like a meat shop or something, delicatessen type thing in his neighborhood. And he saw that the cops were patting people down that ostensibly hadn't done anything. And so he walks in there and immediately there's just an atmosphere. And he's got a gun and they've got guns and it ends up being a shootout. And the way that it's shot is very kind of like he's threatening them, they're threatening him. I mean, they're obviously the cops are threatening the other people in the building by patting them down. And so tensions are high. But just the fact that his character, Jimmy, got to the point where he felt like he needed to protect those people in that delicatessen thing. I mean, that to me is, the situation was fraught before those cops walked in there. It was a difficult situation before those cops got in there. And so the result of it is he ultimately died and the cops were shot. I can't remember if one of the cops died, or I'm not sure if they said that or not. But anyway, it's that whole situation is completely, I mean, multiple situations in this film that were violence between people in the Black Panther Party and the cops were completely useless. They were solvable.
Well, I'm glad you just said that, because I'm thinking to myself, if J. Edgar Hoover didn't get up on a stage in front of 1,000 people and talk about wanting to ruin the Black Messiah and bring him down before he even gets to power, then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. Maybe if people were just, and it's an idealistic way to look at it, and it is definitely rose-tinted glasses, but one part of the society is pushing the other part, and all the other part wants is to just live and maintain, and they're even willing to do for themselves. They're even willing to do things for themselves. Just let me be who I am. But the people in power at the time, I'll say at the time, because we're talking about this particular movie set at a certain time, the people who were in power didn't even want a community to succeed on their own. So they start doing stuff.
It's seen as an existential threat to society. I mean, that's what J. Edgar Hoover saw. That's what the Chicago police officer saw. It's what Mayor Daley saw. All of these people see a group of people separate from the people who look like them, I guess, that are organizing themselves and that are espousing beliefs, Maoist beliefs and communist beliefs. I mean, they called each other comrade. So like, it's not like they were on the opposite side of what you would consider like a democratic capitalistic view, and that freaked people out. I mean, it was freaking people out. So they were worried that they were going to be, I mean, it was all based on fear, really. That's what J. Edgar Hoover was. He was afraid for himself, I'm sure, and for his family and for all the people that he loved. And so he thought that the best way to prevent any bad things from happening is to literally attack these people. And he used the whole might of the FBI to do it.
And it's interesting that you put it that way, because you're right. You have to have an understanding of all sides in order to see where you fit into an issue. Totally get it. And I totally hear what you just said. But maybe Fred Hampton's side wouldn't be worried about communism or wouldn't look into socialism, because he was all about that too, and use those trigger words, for lack of a better term, that scared white America if they weren't being pushed all the time to just not be left alone. Leave us alone. Just let us be us. And that's why I use the Matthew Shepard scenario, because just leave a person alone. And I know I'm simplifying and I'm idealistic, and I know that seems a very easy way out, but
get your
it
soapbox
would
out
be
for you.
the way. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I can already feel the edge of my heels are itching because I need to stand on that soapbox. But it's also true. It's also true that, do you think Matthew Shepard would have, I don't know. I can't speak on him, and I don't want to disrespect his story, but I just don't see the opposite happening. I don't see an organization that's been held down and repressed and told they are wrong because of whatever reason they're told that they're wrong. Gay, pan, black, bi, lesbian, trans. I've never seen an organization come to power and start to squash another power because now they're in power. It's never happened. At least in my lifetime, it's never happened. You got your lips down like you have an example. Was there some kind of big transgendered convention that they decided to kill a bunch of cops for no reason?
If we're talking about politics, it happens all the time. It's happening literally right now. The Democrats came into power and are now going after Republicans. So that's just how it is. I mean, that's a...
That's a way. I completely disagree with that statement. But okay.
Do you disagree with that's the way that it is, or that the Democrats are going after Republicans?
I think we're trying to rectify some wrongs. And I think that for the Republicans to scream out loud now that the Democrats are trying to do stuff to us is in results to what they've done for the last 4 years and the stuff that they do traditionally. So I have no sympathy for anybody who thinks that the Republicans and the Democrats are doing something awful to them.
Well, no, I mean, it's devolving. It's a downward spiral. It's our politics are.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, and it's a tit for tat and a tat for tit, and we don't have enough tits left.
But it's not though. It's no more tits. I agree with you that it's a downward spiral, and I think it's a tit for tat to a degree. But if we didn't have these problems in the last 4 years, we wouldn't have to spend a whole bunch of time rectifying them. Thus, we wouldn't have to come up with some fictitious way to look at the black community to hold them down because we think that they're going to do something that they've never proven to do in the past. And so we're going to start this whole FBI investigation to squash it. It is there are not equal sides in this issue. One side is in power and wants to hold power and wants to hurt people to hold power. And you can compare that to what's going on now too, because one side is no longer in power. They want to hold on to the power. So they're going to say the other side is now hurting our feelings, whatever. Get over it, dude. Buck up. You're exactly right. That's politics. I don't have a problem with that because that's politics. But when people die, it alters my opinion of stuff. So when you hold a group of people down and somebody dies because you're holding that group of people down, and somebody's murdered because you're holding that group of people down, then you are in the wrong. And there's no justification at all for that behavior. None. Regardless of how they saw it, regardless of how J. Edgar Hoover saw the situation and being in fear or whatever. It's good to have an understanding that that's how he felt.
I think if you don't think about that, then J. Edgar Hoover is maybe he was, off the reservation. I don't know, but just trying to understand people's actions by not even trying to rationalize and not trying to affirm them, but just trying to be like, how could anybody ever think that this is okay? It's a good question to ask, and it's worth digging into instead of being like, well, they're crazy. So it's like, well, they feel something. They feel the same emotions that I might feel, but they're going about it in a different way than I would go about it. There's a lot more similarities between people on two sides of an issue than we might think, and that the media is telling us. So those are things I think that we should definitely focus on.
And I think there are 4 entirely different issues that you just brought up, and I don't disagree with one of them. Because you don't get your way, you cannot start saying something about the other side that's not true to get your way.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't lie and kill people to get your way, so your way of life continues. And if you do that, J. Edgar Hoover is, by the way, the thing about him calling and poisoning, the whole thing about keeping Fred Hampton, I think it's this aspect. The screenwriters at the time put that in there before it came out that J. Edgar Hoover really did have something to do with that. Like, it was divulged just recently that is actually in fact. They just guessed it. What a surprise. Side note. So when your side, J. Edgar Hoover's side in this movie, is found out to be wrong, which they are wrong, you just can't do what they were doing to a society for any reason, fear or nothing, then they need to beg back and ask for forgiveness. And then if the other side wants to say, you're right, you know what, you're a human being, I see where you're coming from, you were wrong, you killed people, you have to pay consequences for that, but we forgive you. You can't expect the other side that's been suppressed and repressed for all of these centuries immediately turn around and say, okay, yeah, unity, let's have unity. No, let's have some form of acknowledgement that you did that and some form of accepting that you will work on not doing that again. And I'm going to say the word, some form of reformation.
Reparations, I think, is what you're trying to say.
Reparation. What I said, reformation. I'm sorry, reparation. I was so set on saying it. I said it wrong. Thank you. Reparation. And I'm not talking about financially. I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about some form of acknowledging we were wrong. We will work on trying not to be this way again. We apologize. Here's how we prove it by giving you this: land, food, help, community help, medical something. But that never happens. The side that has murdered and killed and suppressed people for centuries, when they get found out, they say, oh yeah, okay, sorry. Let's have unity now. Come on. When you cause pain to somebody, you have to be responsible for that pain that you caused. And you cannot act any other way other than, I hear that I caused you pain. What can I do to not do that again? Anything else is self-indulgent. And so if we're talking about what J. Edgar Hoover does and why he does it, he still caused a community pain and suffering that didn't have to happen. And I respect your view on that it came out of fear, that it came out of societal changes that people didn't want. I get that. But when people die and are shot and there's 99 cop bullets in an apartment and one Black Panther bullet, there's a problem. And then they charge those people in the apartment.
Yeah, with attempted murder of the cops.
Crazy. And it's still going on to today. So when you say we want responsibility for both sides, understanding of both sides, I'm cool with that because I think you're right. I think we're in the society that we're in right now because nobody listened to one side and then we got what we got. I said that 6 years ago. And 4 years ago when I came out of the polling place and looked around, I was like, yep, we're not listening to all these people. They're going to stand up. But the bottom line for me is when you cause pain, you cannot make it that person's fault that you caused them pain. Mm-hmm. And that's what keeps happening to Black people in this society. That's just what keeps happening.
All right. Did you want to say anything more about Daniel Kaluuya? Or I liked how they would intersperse, especially at the end, his performance with Fred Hampton's performance. And then there's also an official podcast for the Judas and the Black Messiah that is tied in with 99% Invisible, which is another really great podcast. And they kind of will intersperse Daniel Kaluuya speaking as Fred Hampton and the real Fred Hampton. And I thought that he did a good job of evoking Hampton's voice and his cadence and even things like the way that he says party, the word party, which he says a lot in the movie. Makes sense. Black Panther Party. Yeah, I thought that it was not a miming type of a situation, but it was definitely evocative of Hampton's voice and his cadence and his charisma as a speaker, which, I mean, he's very charismatic as a speaker.
Yeah, it's unnerving because when you hear the real Fred Hampton, you're like, daggone, Daniel Kaluuya got that down. Like he got it down. Hey, speaking of which, when they're listening to Malcolm X on the record player and they're both mouthing the words of the speech. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah.
Is that the real Malcolm X?
I'm assuming it is.
I mean, is that...
I'm assuming that his speeches were probably released on record at some point.
Well, because Denzel Washington, he got that down too, because that sounds like Denzel Washington to me. Like I thought, was there some kind of copyright reason they couldn't use Malcolm X's real voice, so they used Denzel Washington's as Malcolm X? Because they sound a lot alike, man. Denzel Washington was born to play that man because at first I was like, wait, is that Denzel Washington? I was like, why would they do that? Because I'm sure they probably could have gotten the rights. I don't even know how that works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was amazing because, man, they sound a lot alike, both of them.
It was even that weird, like Daniel Kaluuya as Fred Hampton miming Malcolm X. Like that was even an one layer removed type of a situation where he's like, I got to sound like Fred Hampton, but I also have to sound like Fred Hampton sounding like Malcolm X. So I was like, dang, that's
yeah, because then he says to her, you got to do the voice.
Yep.
And she's like, yeah, I kind of only do it. I only do it like right here. Yeah. So yeah, it's impressive. And if and when Daniel Kaluuya gets his second Oscar nomination, it'll be well deserved. But I will say this, Lakeith Stanfield he's no sloucher. If there was enough room for Best Actor, I would put him up there because there are scenes in this film that he doesn't have a word, but he doesn't have any dialogue, but exactly what he's thinking.
Yeah, I think that if you will allow me to make a sports reference, he's like the leadoff hitter in a baseball team. You can guarantee that he's going to get on base every game. He's kind of like one of those guys who's like, maybe he doesn't hit like extreme home runs that go outside of the stadium, but he is just like a constantly dependable actor. And he can hold a movie. And we saw that in Sorry to Bother You. I mean, in Atlanta, he's a side character, essentially. Like, well, that's not necessarily true. Atlanta does some really cool stuff with a lot of their characters. Well, they'll give a character a whole episode, and he's the center of the whole episode, or she's the center of the whole episode. And so there's definitely whole episodes that he holds up, and he's one of the only people in the whole episode. So yeah, I mean, he's obviously able to hold a movie, no problem. But you're right, he's not a showy actor, but he's a lived-in actor. I mean, he's definitely one of those actors. He can go on that list of actors who have it. He should get an award every time.
Yeah, why not, right? Yeah, there's two scenes in particular. The scene where he steals the car. And that's incredible because he can't believe he got away with it. And you can see it all go through his face. You can see it all, like you can just see it. You can see everything about it. Like he's relieved that he got away. He can't believe that they actually bought into it, that he actually got away with it. And then the scene where Jesse Plemons is in the speech that we talked about early on. And you can't tell whether or not Bill O'Neill is initiated at that point or still has questions about it because and even Jesse Plemons' character says to him, when I was watching you seemed like you were buying into it. You have to remember. And actually that's the catalyst into the conversation about, putting that substance in his drink. And you're never really sure going through the movie whether or not Bill O'Neill bought into it and then feels bad about it because of self-preservation, or did he not buy into it and didn't really care, so he just is all about self-preservation? You're right. Him being in that world, it must have been an interesting world to be in, and then to fake it at the same time because you're there not for the right reasons, but for self-preservation once again. It's well done, and it's like a great song without lyrics. That's Lakeith Stanfield's performance for me. There are no words sometimes in his performance, but you completely hear the tune, you can hear the melody, and you can just see and feel exactly what he's seeing and feeling. And that's a great movie actor. That's what a great movie actor can do. And man, can he ever do it. Now that it factor, I get why you're saying that because he is a master at his craft, but it's almost like, I don't want to say he doesn't have it because that seems intangible. He does have it, but it's not like he doesn't spark the same feeling when he's on screen that Dominic Fishback does for me. There's something that pops when she's on screen, and he does too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bash on him on any level. There's just a different, and maybe because she's new to me. Maybe because it's the novelty of seeing and feeling this character for the first time and seeing and feeling this actress for the first time. Maybe that's what it is. I don't want to bash on anybody else based on how much I loved her, but I did love her.
Well, it is interesting how because I was trying to think that like, okay, so yeah, I did feel something like that with Dominique Fishback, but I've only seen her in this one film. And so I don't know if it's like does it feel like a lived-in character because this is the one character we've seen her portray? But then I go back to like, some other people that we've had on that list, like John Hawkes or Kevin Costner for me. I don't know if he's on your list or not, but just like those guys have been in a lot of movies and they still feel like each of the characters are just lived in and just integrated. They feel like they're integrated into whatever character they're in. So I'm interested to see what she does next, because I want more of a body of work to dig into that. So yeah.
Mark my words that whatever she's in next, I bet you we don't even recognize her. And we start talking
Sienna
about
Miller.
her, or she's
going to be the next Sienna Miller.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great comparison. That's exact. Sienna Miller was on some talk show the other day that I was on some YouTube rabbit hole going down, and I saw one clip with her on it, and then I saw another talk show with her on it, and I was like, wait, that's the same. I can't even tell she's who she is when she's just herself. I don't know what it is. There's a quality about it. But mark my words that this actress is going to do something that will solidify that opinion for you, because I see what you're saying. You're saying that this is all we have based on it. And, you know, she does such a good job on it. So how do you know? But because she can do such a great job in this is why I can instinctually, I can tell. I can just feel it. It's like the very first time I saw The Color Purple and Oprah Winfrey. Unknown to everybody. Most of that cast was unknown with the exception of Danny Glover, maybe. And there's a feeling. And I remember thinking to myself, whoever that is, she deserves an Oscar nomination. And the whole "you told Harpo to beat me" scene is going to be cinematic history. I knew it the moment it happened, and it did. Now, that said, I just want to let everybody know I might be wrong about the Oscars this year, because I made a bold prediction about somebody, but it doesn't look like it's coming true. So we'll talk about that later.
I just found out that there's like this website that it's like goldenderby.com, and they literally have like stocks like up and down, and I'm kind of like, that's a little funky. Like, I'm okay with it because I'm a 49ers fan, so I'm okay with it. They're like, oh, the 49ers are projected to be the 20th best team in the league, and it's like, oh, well, that sucks, you know. Or there's people actually betting in Las Vegas on, you know, whatever, the 49ers, the draft is coming up. They're betting on like, oh, are the 49ers gonna trade their pick? And I'm okay with all that. But like, when it comes to like awards for somebody being in a movie, like, I don't know, it just seems kind of weird to have like a stock ticker for something like that.
Here's what I don't necessarily have a problem with Best Picture, because that doesn't affect anybody other than like the producers and stuff like that. It doesn't directly affect anybody, but to see your name going up and down and to predict whether or not you're going to, it's all a waste of a little bit of time for me, even though I'm in love with the Oscars and I love it. Here's what I find fascinating about when they do stuff like that, though. They're always wrong. They're not always wrong, meaning they predict the right things most of the time, but they're always off.
Yeah.
There's always a nomination they didn't see coming. There's always a win, not always, but there's usually a win that they didn't see coming. Olivia Colman. Now they're talking about how that was like this thing that she stole from Glenn Close. And I'm like, there are people out there, me, who saw it coming. So
what about Bong last year? I mean, what about all of the Oscars that Parasite won? Was GoldenDerby.com on top of that? I don't know.
Well, we would have to go back and look at it, but there's always so much room for mistakes that I see why people are interested, but it's just not how I'm interested in it. Once the nominations are out, I would like it to be one of those things where it was more neck and neck, where, you know, you weren't sure who's going to win most of the time. And lately that's happened more often than not. Well, not a lot, but it's happened. Parasite being the prime example, Olivia Colman being another example. It does happen where people go, and you know, they're shocked by it. But the reason why the Golden Derby and all that stuff doesn't interest me is because it takes away from those moments of, she won. Yeah. It takes away from it, because every year it happens, every single year, and it's happening right now. Wait till the Golden Globe nominations, because after the Golden Globe nominations, we'll be able to predict this better. And then the Golden Globe nominations, wait till the Independent Spirit Awards, wait till this, wait till the Critic Choice Awards. And now it's wait till the Golden Globes are awarded. Yeah. Right. And now when the Golden Globes happen and the people who are predicted to win don't win, they'll go, oh, well, they're only 60% right most of the time. And it's only 90 people. So it only takes 30 people to pick the best picture or the best actor. So that's why the Golden Globes really aren't a predictor of the Oscars. But now they are, because it's before that. So
yeah, it is an industry. But even down to like the WGA, which those nominations just came out today, and I didn't realize that there's all kinds of movies that weren't even eligible. So that's not even a good yardstick. So I don't get that.
Why? I need to read out why they did a lot of them just recently, why they weren't.
Yeah, it has to be written underneath the WGA requirements or the WGA guidelines. And like, for example, Mank was written by Jack Fincher, who passed away 17 years ago. And he wrote the thing 30 years ago. So it's not even, so no, it was not written under WGA supervision, or it wasn't like filed with the WGA when he started and all this jazz. So, I mean, that's probably the reason why Mank specifically can't be in there, but there's other reasons for other ones, I'm sure.
Well, getting back to the movie we're talking about right now, Judas and the Black Messiah, if it does end up on the short list of Best Picture and supporting actor or wherever it lands, it's a good thing, because once again, the Oscars for me are about an education. And, you know, when I was 15 years old, I probably would have never heard of this movie, and all of a sudden it's nominated for an Oscar, and now it's on my radar. Then I go see it, and then I explore this world, and now I have an education about a subject that I knew nothing about, and I feel better as a human being that I have progressed in my life, knowing about other things that have happened in the past. That's why the Oscars matter to me. Mm-hmm. That's why any kind of award recognition is good for a film. It's promotion. You're right. It's an industry. It puts butts in the seat and puts money in the pockets of people who produce movies like this, so they will produce more movies about subject matter that might not have been made for whatever other reason.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we've had a string of movies that we've talked about over the last few weeks that probably wouldn't have gotten made 10 years ago. And so it's a confluence of events potentially. And I think that as a movie-going audience, whether it's about a real thing or whether it's about a completely made-up thing, I think that it's hopefully opening people's eyes to different scenarios, different situations, and giving people a different point of view. So that's what art's for. All right. You can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and you can find us on YouTube. Just search for Actor and Engineer Podcast, and we'll see you next time.